This is an AZCourtHelp legal talk on how to apply for citizenship.
My name is Kathryn Mahady. I'm the immigration attorney at Aspey, Watkins and Diesel. I started our immigration department when I came here 12 years ago. We only do family-based immigration and citizenship applications. And citizenship applications are one of my favorite things that I get to do as a lawyer. It's an absolute delight. It's a really exciting process. As long as everything is done right, it works. And the key to doing it right is determining eligibility. So we're going to go over today a very basic citizenship overview, eligibility overview, and then we'll look at the forms that you need to fill out, or one would need to fill out to submit to the U.S. Customs and Immigration Service, USCIS. And I'll show you where to get those and all of that information and where they get sent. There are a lot of scams targeting immigrants specifically, people who offer to sell you these forms or to help, but really are just getting personal information to exploit. So it's something you do not need a lawyer for. Nobody needs a lawyer to file for citizenship. And I do represent people, but most of the time, those folks, their primary language is not English, and they are nervous about the messing it up, because you'll see the forms are not very user friendly, but they are, when you read them, they're understandable. It's something that you can do, or one could do very well and successfully without a lawyer. And so that's why it's great to be able to present this, because you really don't need a lawyer to apply for citizenship. The key to a successful citizenship application is determining whether you're eligible. And the best circumstance, which is extremely unusual and very complicated, is when people come to me to say they need to apply for citizenship, and it turns out they are already a US citizen. In 12 years, that has happened once. So it's not something I expect ever or think is likely ever. But if you are a US citizen already, there's a really complicated analysis to determine whether you are. And then you file a different form, of course. So there's some resources on, you'll see at the bottom there, uscis.gov. So there's a way to go through a kind of yes, no flow chart on USCIS's website to determine if you are already a citizen. It is, like I said, extremely unusual. It's a really complicated analysis related to your parents' citizenship, your birth in the US, or where you were born, if you were what's called legitimized by a US citizen parent, your US military service, or eligibility for amnesty in the 1980s. So it's way beyond where we're going to go today, but I wanted to be sure to let you know that there's a resource for, if you think, hey, I think my mom was a US citizen, where you can go to figure out if you acquired what's called derivative citizenship. For the folks who are not citizens, which is the majority of the people applying for citizenship, there's 2 pages of eligibility. And as long as you meet these eligibility requirements, you should be successful in a citizenship application. So the first is that you need to be over 18 years old, need to be a legal permanent resident. And what that means is just that you have a green card. And you need to have had that green card for either 3 years if you acquired it from a marriage or through a marriage to a US citizen, or 5 years for all other categories of people who have green cards. You need to have had minimal travel outside the US. So not one trip of more than 1 year or 30 total months in multiple trips. There's exceptions available and permissions you can get to do that, but it can be a challenge if you have that travel. It doesn't make you ineligible. It's just that you need to request exceptions. The fourth bullet here is that you need to be able to read, write, and speak basic English. There are exceptions for age, long residence in the US, and disability. We'll look at those, but they're very straightforward. If you're this age and have lived in the US for this long, you're exempt from this aspect of the English test. You also need to, this fifth bullet here, be able to pass the civics test. And these are very basic questions about US history and US government that the Immigration Service, US Customs and Immigration Service, wants to make sure that people who are becoming citizens know. And there are also exceptions for age and long residence in the US and disability. The last bullet on the page, or on the slide, but not the last requirement, is that you have good moral character. If that sounds vague, it is something that you can easily prove with a no checked box on criminal history. If you have criminal history, that's okay. You're not necessarily excluded from applying for citizenship, but you need to show what you've done to establish your good moral character after that. If you were required to, these are more eligibility requirements for applying for citizenship. If you were required to register for the selective service, so that's a draft, you need to have done so. Some people, they were older than when they received their green card, they were older than the draft registration requirement. It still only applies to men. So it's only if it was required, you needed to register for the selective service. You need to never have, and I've never seen this come up, but these are some of the requirements: deserted the US Armed Forces or received an exemption or discharged from the US Armed Forces because you are a non-citizen. So if you were called to serve, you need to not have either deserted or said, no, I don't need to serve, I'm not a citizen and don't intend to become one. You need to promise that you are, these last three bullets here, that you are willing to serve in the military or civilian service of the US if you're required to by law. I've never seen this come up. We haven't had a draft in the US in a very long time. You need to be willing to support the US Constitution, and you need to be willing to take an oath of allegiance to the US. The US does not technically recognize, or does not recognize at all, dual citizenship, but many other countries in the world do. To become a US citizen, you need to technically renounce any other citizenships that you have. For a 3-year application, meaning that you've had a green card for 3 years, you need to have lived with and be married to a US citizen for at least 3 years. And you need to not have been out of the US for 18 months or more during that 3 years. So the US Customs and Immigration Service gets very touchy about people applying for benefits of being a US resident, but not being a US resident. So they want to make sure that you're actually here. This 3-year application is only available to people who are married to a US citizen for at least 3 years and lived with them. And you need to prove that you lived with them by bills addressed to the jointly to the immigrant and the spouse, leases, deeds. You actually need to provide some pretty personal information to USCIS to show that you lived with your spouse. So now that's all eligibility. And if a person is eligible, now the next section of what we'll go through is the process. And the process is filling out and submitting to immigration the N400. This up at the top here where it says process N400, all of immigration's forms have a letter and then numbers. And the one for naturalization, that's why it's an N, is N400. This link underneath the title of this slide is a live link to the form. Immigration likes to, it appears, update these forms and make very minimal changes to them, then reject the prior version. So I always encourage people to go online, fill out all the parts of the form, and I'll show you what the form looks like shortly. Fill it all out, and once you're ready to submit it, you can submit the N400 online. I have not done that yet because we did an I-9 online, and I think the system's just not quite ready for online processing yet. So I've still been sending all of our citizenship applications by paper, and that's fine. The fee is $725. It's $640 if you or the applicant is 75 years of age or older. The reason for that is that there's an $85 biometrics fee. So fingerprinting, pictures of your face, all kinds of personal information, identifying information that immigration requires you to go down to Phoenix to do and it does not require of applicants that are 75 years of age or older. There's a fee waiver. That's a hefty fee. There's a fee waiver potentially available if household income is less than 150% of the federal poverty level. That federal poverty level is really low. So it needs to be, to qualify for a fee waiver, the applicant's income needs to be very low. This website that's up at the top, www.uscis.gov, is where all these forms are. And as far as federal information, federal government information sources, which I don't usually find very helpful, the immigration's website, the USCIS's website, is surprisingly informative and relatively user-friendly. So all the forms are there. The fee waiver application is the I-942, and then there's how to get the I-942 below. So that's the first step in the process. So you have to pull the form and get together $725. This is what the website looks like. And like I said, I don't generally find federal government agency websites to be very helpful or very user-friendly, but I do find immigrations to be both, surprisingly. The citizenship link, so up in the top here, this citizenship link is, I find, very helpful to get some information on. And this is where all the information that I'm providing you today comes from, is from USCIS's website. So this is what the N400 page looks like. And there is a spot to click file online if you choose to do that. I haven't chosen to do it yet. We'll try again soon, but the last time I tried, it just wasn't ready yet. This is lower on the same page. So I had to kind of cut and paste. This is where you get the actual form, but it's all still from that uscis.gov N400. And what you do to get the most recent form is click the section that I highlighted there. You open up that arrow, and that will give you the form and the instructions. This is what the form itself looks like. So this is the very top of the form. You'll see up in the right corner, USCIS form N400. And then the really important thing in this little section in the upper right-hand corner is the expiration date. Now, you would think, okay, 2025 or 2.5 years from November 2025, I can print this form out and use this form for sure. This should be fine. And that would be a really reasonable thing to think. But like I said, immigration likes to update their forms. So there's an addition date too, which is at the bottom. So just always make sure that you are getting the form as close to the time that you're filing it as possible, because we've had problems where we send out a packet of an application with the fee and all the documents, lots of sensitive information, and immigration issues a new form while that packet is in the mail, and then they start rejecting the old forms. So there's really nothing you can do to prevent that, but make sure always that you're getting the most updated version of the form. And just underneath these boxes here, where it says start here, it says type or print in black ink. They are not kidding. Black ink, and that's how you need to do it. So this is still the first page of the N400, and this form is 20 pages long, and we won't go through it all. Most of it is very basic information about yourself, prior addresses or the applicant, prior addresses, prior employers, lots of personal information so that immigration can check this application against their records of where the applicant has been. But very important, in the upper right corner here, you need to enter, or the applicant needs to enter, their 9-digit A number. If the person who's applying has been a legal permanent resident for a very long time, like 30 plus years, their A number will be 8 digits. And that causes some confusion at USCIS, but almost all, I've only had that happen once or twice, that the A number was 8 digits instead of 9. And this is question number 1 of part 1. Here's the eligibility. Most people fall under A, which is that they've been a legal permanent resident of the United States. So they've had a green card for at least 5 years. And the way you calculate that 5 years is from when your green card starts, not when you got here, or not when the applicant got here. It's from when the green card was issued, when USCIS issued that green card. Or then B is that you've lived with and been married to a US citizen for at least 3 years and have had a green card for at least 3 years. And the citizen has been a citizen for at least 3 years. And then it gets a little bit more complicated beyond kind of where we're able to go today in C and D. I've never used those. By far the most common is A, that the person has had a green card for 5 years, and that's from the date of the initial issuance of the green card. This is from page 1 to page 2, and this is a good indication of what kind of information you need to give on this citizenship application and why you probably don't need a lawyer, honestly. So part 2 is the information about the person applying for naturalization. And we've got name as the current legal name. Number 2 is name exactly as it appears on the green card, which is not green anymore, but on the permanent resident card. And then as you go down to numbers 3, 4, and 5, these are all just personal identifying information about the applicant. So it's not something that you need a lawyer to fill out. When people really carefully read the question, which I always encourage people to do, and try it on their own, they usually don't need an attorney. So this is just a what to expect on these form pages. Then I pulled out a few of the interesting ones, the questions that USCIS asks that are a little bit unusual. The first section I wanted to look at were for the exemptions from the language test and or the civics test. So number 12 here, and this is on page 2, so still in part 2, there's an exemption for disability that prevents someone from being able to, or impairs someone from being able to pass the English language and civics test. There's some follow-up paperwork that needs to come with a claim of disability or impairment that makes someone unable to take and pass those tests. There are just straight exemptions, though, under number 13. And I do have clients regularly with some very serious concerns about their ability to pass the English test and the civics test. And there's the only exemption from the civics test is the disability. But the civics test is, I'll show you, it's really not that bad. So and if you qualify, you can have a very simplified version of the civics test. So the exemptions are for the English language test if the person is 50 years of age or older, has lived in the US for at least 20 years. Then that person does not need to take the English language test. B is higher age, lower residency, so 55 years of age or older for the applicant and lived in the US at least 15 years. And then 13C here is for residents who are at least 65 years of age and have lived in the US for 20 years. Then they get a very simplified version of the civics test. So for part 3, for people who are requesting accommodations because of disabilities for the tests, that they will need to submit some additional information to establish that disability. But I've never had anyone have issues with getting an exemption to the test or just passing the tests. That has not been a problem for people. Like I said earlier, USCIS gets very picky about people spending time outside the US, significant amounts of time outside of the US, and wanting benefits deriving from their residency in the US. So Part 9 asks for not just lengthy stays outside the US. The question asks how many days total have you been outside of the US during the last 5 years? So the applicant needs to get their passport out. It's a huge problem to give USCIS inaccurate information. So people need to go through their last 5 years, look through the passport, see what trips they've taken, or for people who are planning to apply for citizenship, keep track prospectively of trips that take them outside of the US. And so you have to list everywhere you went over the last 5 years outside of the US. Inside the US, they don't care, but outside of the US, they want to know where you were. And then there are several pages of questions, yes, no questions, that seem pretty obviously yes is the wrong answer. So number 1, have you ever claimed to be a US citizen? And the challenge here is that you have to answer these truthfully, because if you're caught giving false information to USCIS, that will disqualify the entire application. The US claim, a false claim of US citizenship, is one of the most disqualified, the highest disqualifying thing that people can do to really make themselves unsuccessful in immigration. So it is extremely important that an applicant has never claimed to be a US citizen. Do you owe any overdue federal, state, or local taxes? Now, some of these are not disqualifying. So if you do, if the applicant does, they need to answer yes. And they need to answer truthfully for all of these things. But these are the type of questions that show up for, it's about 3 pages of just yes or no questions. And you want the answer to be no. If it is, that's good. If not, then you have to explain it. It doesn't mean that the applicant is definitely out of luck, but it will require explanations. This is the section on criminal history. So I mentioned earlier that one of the requirements of to be eligible for US citizenship is to prove good moral character. An arrest and even some convictions does not necessarily mean you do not have good moral character. It's just that you have to show all the information about that offense. And then it's up to immigration. Nobody should ever try to hide these. This is the federal government. Assume they will find it. I've never agreed to help anyone hide them, and I never will. And I really strongly discourage anyone from not giving full disclosure on this application. I have had some people who had criminal convictions that did make them deportable. Most basically drugs, violence, sex crimes, domestic violence crimes, and weapons-related offenses. Most of those make people deportable. So these are all, have you ever committed or assisted in committing or attempted to commit a crime for which you were not arrested even? And then there are questions about if the applicant has ever been through what's called a deferred prosecution or a diversion program, where there was a charge and the person had to take classes, do treatment, whatever the court's requirements were, but then the case was dismissed. All of that needs to get disclosed. And it can be a huge pain in the neck to get the records from the law enforcement agency and the court, but it's absolutely necessary. Those were the parts of the 20-page N400 that I wanted to highlight just because of how important those are, and to give you an overview of what that form looks like. There's additional documents that applicants need to send with the application and the fee, and they're listed here. They're also listed on the instructions on the website that I linked at the top of this page. There needs to be a photocopy of both sides of the permanent residence card. And again, we call that a green card. It used to be green, it's not anymore. A check or money order for the filing fee, or now you can use a credit card with the form that I linked there. For people who have changed their name since they received a green card, this happens with marriage or for any reason, they need to present or provide a copy of the name change paperwork, and then need to prove the person's eligibility for citizenship for a 3-year application. For a 5-year application, it's obvious the green card's more than 5 years old. But to prove eligibility for a 3-year application, the person needs to provide a marriage certificate, birth certificate for a spouse, and proof of shared residence. I'm not seeing a lot of 3-year applications, partly because it's taking immigration about 4 years to get the permanent green card. After there's a 2-year preliminary green card that spouses of US citizens receive, and then they need to file together to get the permanent green card to show that the marriage was made in good faith, not as what's called marriage fraud. And that's taking years for immigration to do. So I just haven't been seeing a lot of 3-year applications. Those people, my understanding is, are still eligible, but they're just not applying because they don't have the card itself. And then if the applicant has any criminal history, the applicant needs to provide arrest records and related court records. There's a very thorough checklist on the N400 website that goes through everything that someone needs to provide if they have a criminal history. This is that checklist. So it breaks down, all applicants must send the following 3 items, and those are the ones that 1 and 2 are the ones that I listed. The number 3 is if you're living outside the US but applying for citizenship, you need to provide 2 passport photos. And then some additional documents. And this checklist goes on for, I think, about 2 pages. So there's additional documents that you need to send if these certain situations apply to the applicant. Big overview of the process is, so we've determined eligibility, and the next step is to complete and submit the N400, the additional documentation, and the fee. And that goes to USCIS. It can go online, but like I said, I am not really comfortable with their online system just yet. I'm hoping very much that they get that streamlined so that it can help with the huge backlog of cases that immigration is dealing with. A few weeks later, it's been about 2 weeks lately, so this is the second bullet, the applicant receives a receipt notice from USCIS. They issue just a notice, it's a letter that comes in the mail that USCIS has received the packet, which is actually really comforting to know that it has been received. That receipt notice will give a receipt number, which is what immigration uses to identify that application. That's about 2 weeks, 2 to 4 weeks lately. USCIS has been getting those receipt notices out. The next step is that it's been about 4 months after the application is received, and this is all, it all varies with workload. There was a huge vacancy, a large number of vacancies at USCIS that were not being filled under the prior administration. It's taking a really long time to get them staffed up and caught up. So it's, we have to wait. Usually I put on this steps. Step 2 is wait. But right now for citizenship application, it's been taking about 4 months to get a biometrics appointment. And that's that appointment in Phoenix at the USCIS office. It's kind of by the airport. For people under 75 years old, the USCIS tends to issue those appointment notices with short notice, and they're difficult to reschedule, like rescheduling anything with the federal government. It's just a challenge. USCIS has the discretion to waive biometrics appointments, and they have been for some citizenship applicants and for some green card renewals. About 8 months after the packet is received, this is just what we've been seeing lately, USCIS has been issuing a notice of interview. And the interview is when the person goes to, so the applicant goes to the USCIS office in Phoenix. And again, it's by the airport, meets with a USCIS agent who asks some really basic questions about the application and administers the English and civics test. But that happens right at the interview. And that agent advises the applicant that they are going to approve their, if all goes well, which in my experience always has, the agent advises that they will approve that, or that USCIS will approve the application and will send an appointment for the naturalization ceremony, which is, they're in Phoenix and Tucson at the federal court. It's a really, really sweet and touching ceremony. Some information about the English and the civics test. This does cause people a lot of stress, but the nice thing is that USCIS gives all the questions and all of the answers that you can study, or the applicant can study. So that is doable, and it's pretty basic stuff that immigration wants citizens to know. So the nice thing though is that all of the questions are available. And so there's a practice test that officer themselves, the agent, asks the questions, and you need to, at the last 20, and you need to get 12 right. So just over 50%. And I've never had anyone fail.
We wish you the best in your application. Thank you very much.